So my name is Angelica Bravo. I am one of the 30 under 30 participants, and I'm the Training and Content Development Program Manager at Goodwill Industries International. I have today the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing Elliott Masie. So I know most of you already know who he is, and you can definitely Wikipedia him, so I'm going to introduce you from my perspective on who I think Elliott Masie is. And I consider him as the curation guru. And I can tell you that because I was able to attend one of his curation lab workshops, and he was able to help me come up with a curation definition for my organization. So without further ado, Elliott, kick it off.
Thank you very much, Angelica. The format of this session this is a new experiment for us, is what we would call a super session. So it's going to be about 40 minutes long. We're videotaping all of it so we can share it with everybody at the conference and beyond. And for the most part, we're not doing a lot of active Q&A in this, just to be able to do that. I will linger for a little bit afterwards, and we're probably going to do some other, putting online some other content around curation coming back. So, but I'm going to try to give you, if you will give me permission, to sort of a deep dive as to where we think curation is at the end of 2018 going into 2019. Put in a simplest form, curation is about a single word which we use called optimize. Optimize, meaning the goal of curation is to optimize the efforts, the time, the energy, the frustration, the money costs of multiple people as they deal with multiple forms of content. So let's give an example of one of those ways. Right now, I could send everybody in this room an email with 117 links to videos, PDFs, some online modules, a few books, and some blogs about curation. I could send you literally a page with 117 assets. Ask yourself whether you would enjoy or not enjoy getting that from me. Okay, and maybe just by a show of hands, how many of you would enjoy getting that 117? I'm seeing very few hands go up here. Well, my guess why many of you would not is because immediately you would now have a cost of ownership, to use a phrase that the Gardner Group uses. You would have a cost of ownership of figuring out which of those 117 elements has some predicted value to you. In fact, I would argue that if I sent you a list of 117, you will probably need to spend 40 hours curating and optimizing what they are. Meaning, you'd probably need to start to watch it. You would probably, in some cases, want to read it. In some cases, you would want to not only watch it or read it, but you would want to see what other people are saying about watching and reading it. In some instances, it would be a really interesting white paper until you got to the very last page of the white paper and you realize it was paid for by a company selling curation software. Doesn't mean it's not true, but you might not have started to read that if you had known that. So understand, we're now living in an era where the number of elements or units or items of knowledge, content, information, resource, examples are going up radically. In a wonderful way, they're going up radically. And that's where that word curation comes in. Curation is our process of optimizing that selection into something that brings value to at least one of three players. The first player is the learner. In other words, I want to optimize, so let's take a learner sitting over there named Leslie. So Leslie Odom Jr. and I were chatting about a variety of topics, and I told him I'd send him some content on some things. So I need to keep in mind that Leslie doesn't want 117. In fact, what's really interesting, there's a number that we call the topple number. The topple number is where one more asset than that topple number means people will probably look at none. Let me say it again. Sending you one more than that topple number, it all topples over. So if I really wanted you to watch a piece of video after this super session, and I sent you a note with one or two or maybe three, and I could track it, which I could, we'd probably see significant number of people who would at least open it, if not finish it. If I sent you the topple number, and for me, the topple number is somewhere around 7. When I send you the 8th item, many of you would not open any of those. You hear me? You would not open any of them because at that moment, we will have toppled the optimization of that. Now, what does the learner need to optimize? Okay, this is really interesting. Some of what we need to optimize is we need to make sure it's mapped back to what we need. It's mapped back to what we need. So if I send you, my friend Elaine Beach wrote a wonderful, beautiful book all about the world of learning and training and development, and I guess I have a small chapter in that book. Sending you Elaine's book is wonderful because it's a rich collection. But if my goal were to optimize it, I would send you Elaine's book, and I would maybe put 3 stickies of 3 stories that you might want to read in Elaine's book. Now, you could do something else. You could maybe go online, I don't think it exists yet, but where everybody who read Elaine's book could vote on what were the 3 best for what reason. So some of what you might want is in mapping it, how do I map it to what I need, is to use expertise other than your own to make sure, is this what I need? And you know that one of the dilemmas in a lot of learning programs we go to is that what's advertised isn't always delivered. Or, this is more insidious, what's advertised is delivered at too low of a level. Or, it's delivered at too high of a level in that. So that first level of optimizing for the learner is how do we make sure it's giving them what they need? The second level, and it's a big one, is how do we give them a recommendation set that will help them make better choices? How do we give them a recommendation set? So let's imagine I sent you this list of 117 cool items. What if when it arrived, you could ask for your recommendation engine, which probably most of you don't have yet, that would literally be able to then colorize on there the items based on what a peer group that you trust had indicated? How do you actually go in and from a curation point of view, get recommendations for that? And those recommendations may be rating. Did I like it or not like it? Did I like it from 1 to 5? Did I open it and actually finish it? Did I finish it and use it? So we could go through a whole set of those elements there. And many folks here, and I don't know if Dana is here, I have a good friend from Accenture, where we've done a lot of thinking about curation together. But what Dana and I believe is that we are probably a year to 3 years away from you wanting to have or subscribing to a recommendation engine. Means where you will actually import into your content system recommendations from internal peers, internal experts, external peers, external experts. So what they want is, is it mapped to what I need, and then is there a recommendation engine? The third piece is a more interesting one that I found, which is the format something that maps to my likelihood of being able to optimize it well? Is the format something that I feel will optimize it for what I want? So I'm starting down an interesting model, which many of you should do. How many of you do corporate videos internally? Okay, I want to give you a little suggestion. And I'm going to start to do this in the new year. I'm going to put a 30-second coming attraction to every video that I do. A 30-second thing. So I would say, if I were doing a video right now, hi, this is Elliott Masie. Hi, this is Elliott Masie. This video will give you a 40-minute overview of the conceptual levels of optimization. I'll be just giving a few examples. It will give you a frame of where we are. We're moving to other pieces, and there are 4 links to other content that you might do. I'll be delivering the whole thing in a verbal story. There are no illustrations. Boom. Now, what if every time we got a learning asset, we got a coming attraction that's with it? Now, I won't go to a movie at my local theater if I haven't watched the coming attractions. Because I want to, in fact, I will tell you, being a producer, many organizations radically spend on coming attractions. There's one company that spends 30% of their production cost on the coming attraction. Because if they get you to the movie, that's the most important thing. So the director doesn't get to direct the coming attraction in that. But I believe that partially what we need to do is to help the learner understand, we'll accept the content is right, it's recommended. Is the format optimal? Because sometimes you want a paragraph. Sometimes you want searchable or copyable text. Sometimes you want a graphic. Sometimes you want a ability for you to, have a piece of very precise video. Sometimes you want technical information. We keep going in all of this. So what I think is important for the learner is to optimize the format. And sometimes that's even duration. So a lot of times the content you offer people is radically more than the content they're wanting to consume. So can you just right now, can you imagine what I'm saying? The first group in curation that we want to handle is optimizing the learner. Now let me be blunt. Most learners don't have a good curation model, strategy, technology, or the like. So I'm going to ask you to, I'm not going to do it very often because we can't put on video, but just for a moment, I want you to talk at your tables with each other, just for a moment. Let's assume I send you that 117 piece list, and you start to try to figure out what you want, what's the best format, and the like. Just turn to your neighbor. Where would you put your curation decisions? What tool or environment would you actually use to curate or optimize which of those 117 items? So just talk to your neighbors for a moment about that. Okay, hello. I'm going to stop you here. Being from New York, I'm not going to go around and ask every table to report out here. But I'll make a prediction. It looks like we have maybe 200 people in the room here, okay? I would make a prediction that there are probably 115 different ways in which you will curate. And my bet is that very few of you are highly pleased with the system that you're using to curate. Some of you might put it in a file folder, in Dropbox. Some of you might put it in a to-do list, in an item area. But my bet is that very few of you have a highly organized curation locker to put it in, to find it, re-find it, share it, remember what the elements are, even grade it when you see it so you can share it with somebody else. So understand that in the world of curation, our first target is the learner, and here's the reality. They're hungry for it, they don't know how to do it, and they don't have tools to do it with. So guess what happens? What's the guess of what happens? If they're hungry for it, they don't know how to do it, and they don't have tools how to do it. Essentially, the learner starts to be very ad hoc in their curation, and by the way, very influenced. So my first item to share with you is that many people will use Google, Bing, Yahoo as a search engine for that. But we're manipulated because what's at the top of the list when you do a Google search? Advertiser-supported items there. So my first thing I have to do is to ask somebody, as a personal curator, figure out who wrote it, what do they want, what's their business objective, and the like, because that will reframe what I'm doing. Do you understand this first group? Okay. Let's now talk about the other two, and we can do them in any orders, but I'm going to call the second group the learning producer, okay? The learning producer is the person inside the organization. They might be an instructional designer, a learning designer. They might be an external learning producer that you've hired, you work with from a supplier or the like. But the learning producer has this huge other challenge on optimizing. They want to be able to reuse content that other people have come up with. So if my job is to build up a set of assets as to how best to handle customers who are annoyed with us, whose English is not great. Think about it, okay? You have a high problem of customer service frustration, often when the person who is calling in or doesn't have great English and they're not understanding not their fault, it's just part of that. Now, if I were building that as a learning producer, my first step as a learning producer is I want to curate what do we already have. I want to curate what we already have, okay? So I know that out there in your organization land are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects that are out there, okay? I got a note, I have a video, I even have a case study and the like. But my first problem is most organizations don't have, remember I asked Mrs. Bush about are you Dewey Decimal or Library of Congress? Most of you forget Dewey Decimal or Library of Congress. You don't have a system. So once again, a quick little thing. Talk to the people at your table. How many total PowerPoints are there in your organization? And where are they and how hard is it to find them? Okay. So, how many of you have from 10 to 100 PowerPoints in your organization? How many does that number start at about 5,000 PowerPoints? How many of you might it go up to the 100,000 level? And some of it might go to 1,000,000 level. Where are they? You know where most PowerPoints are? They're on hard drives of desktops. They're probably not indexed. They're probably not tagged. They're probably not numbered. They're probably not cross-related. We don't know how many of them actually have ever been used. We don't know if any of them are out of date. So just understand, if I were building out this as a learning producer, the natural place to start is what do we own already? And guess what? We don't have a system, we don't have a tagging model, and the like. Now it gets even more complex, okay? I probably should warn a lavalier, but you know, Lauren, hopefully I won't fall apart here. Some of our best content looks like this. It looks a lot like this. The only problem with this content, it's from 3 years ago. And we have a whole new set of rules. So our dilemma is this content exists as course number 1, but it's not really curated to see that course number 1 is actually 3 bits. Because wouldn't it be good for the learning producer to say, I only want the yellow bit? So I want to deconstruct that piece of content to reuse the bit that I need. Now, I'm saying this and nobody's shaking their head no. It's logical that you have in your organization 100,000 PowerPoints where slide 7 is awesome. On slide 7 on PowerPoint 9,211. But you have no way of finding it. You have no way of getting it. You have no way of even knowing if somebody else has gotten it. You have no way of knowing if it's out of date. Is it in compliance? Will it totally annoy the senior manager who didn't want it, you know? And plus which, we don't know how to deconstruct it or reuse it. So, the second bit that we need to look at is how do we as learning producers curate? And to do that, we're going to have to do a much more thorough job of searching for things, of, I believe, tagging or labeling things, so literally I can get at them easily again. And this sounds almost hallucinogenic, but I don't mean it that way. But starting to build a data analytical model that would say of those 150,000 PowerPoints, here are 40 that I really need, and guess what? 21 of them are written by Sarah Jones. And who's Sarah Jones? Because she might be the right person I need. So what's really interesting when you start to curate is you find an object, not that you want to use the object, but you want to use the originator of the object. Or you want to find other objects that that person did. The other element that we need to do as producers is that we need to make sure when we produce something that the learners actually know it exists. Let me say it again, it sounds pretty simple. We produce something and the learners actually know that it exists. So ironically, with all the money we've spent on LMSs and LCMSs, with all of these really now expanded collections of content that we're getting from LinkedIn Learning, from Coursera, from DDI, Harvard Business, and the like, our dilemma is how does the learner find the one bit that they need today? The one bit that they need today. And I'm going to mix it up even one more element because this is the really interesting element. Historically, we've all been building courses. Whether they're instructor-led courses or e-learning courses, we've been building courses, or webinar-delivered courses. Increasingly now, so let's take this. This was a really good course, okay? It was a really good course. But it turns out the learner would respond best. So as the producer, I want to deconstruct that course so I can just get at one bit of it. Because this might be a job aid that I need or the like. So partially what we have to start to do is to think about, what does the learning producer need in terms of optimization? Then we get to the third area. So we've got the learner and we've got the learning producer. The third area is the business. Now we're going to go into a couple of different folks in the business. The manager of the worker in the business. Because I'm not a learning producer, but I know that I've got working with me Sam, and I want Sam to do a better job. So now what I want to do is I want to figure out, how do I either help Sam go in to curate and find what he or she needs, or B, how do I get the learning producer to do it, or how do I just get it myself? Because here's the most interesting thing. The majority of content that's learning and knowledge rich, that is aimed at the learner, is now no longer coming through learning and development. Let me say it again. A growing and larger percentage of the content that the learner gets is not coming through L&D. It's coming from corporate communications. It's coming from IT. It's coming from the business unit and the like. So what we need to make sure is, whatever we build out as a curation model has to be something that the business, people who are not in the learning field in the business, can use, that they can get at. And this includes things that will now make some of you feel uncomfortable. Our curation has to be compliance ready. So somehow we have to make sure that when we send this to Sam or Pat or whoever, that it's going to them, that it's all legal, kosher, up to date, doesn't violate money laundering laws, isn't harassing or the like. So suddenly, curation needs to have to help us make sure it's all kosher. I'm using a New York City Jewish term here, but you know. The other thing that the business is going to want to do, and it's an interesting element, is they're going to want to figure out the cost. Because if the business says it's okay for you to go get what assets you need, that's fine if they're free. But what if they cost a bunch? So how will we contain the cost of curation? And cost has two times. It's what we pay is one side of cost, but the other side of cost is the wage time to go there. The wage time to go there. I've been impressed. One of the most successful businesses that's out there, and there are 2 or 3 of them, are businesses that take big, thick books like Dan Pink's, or medium-sized books like Leslie's, and they edit them down to be about 6-page summaries. You know, about 6-page summaries, like Monarch Notes used to be, you know, in college and the like. And what was, I totally put it down until one of my friends sent me them, and immediately I subscribed to one of those services. Because what I found was that I often didn't want the book, I didn't want the chapter, I wanted the small subversion of the chapter. Now what's interesting, the scaled down version of that book costs more than the book costs. I want you to hear that. The book might be $19. The compressed version of the book is $49. Now talk to your neighbor. How does that make sense that we're going to pay more for the edited version of the book than the book itself? Just talk to your neighbor for a minute. Why would that be? Okay. Anybody want to take a guess? I know I'm not supposed to get the audience involved, but I'll break my own rules here. Anybody want to take a guess? Why would we pay more for the stripped down version? Oh, great. We've got our throwable sponge mic. One of my favorite tools. Throw it there, but don't in the back. He's got it, but don't hand it. You got to throw it. You can do it from closer, but throwing is part of how it gets energy. Yeah, excellent, good. Oh, now it's a double pass. Go ahead.
Time is money.
Okay. I didn't hear. What?
Time is money.
Time and money. Intriguingly, I will pay more for less. I will pay more. I was just actually in a lunch with some folks, and I explained years ago, I realized for one of my labs that nobody from New York City ever attended. So I called up some of my colleagues who came to conferences. I said, how come? He said, well, no course takes 3 days. We're from New York. So I offered a 1-day version of my 3-day course for twice the cost of the 3-day course, only open to people who could certify they lived in the 5 boroughs in Manhattan. And everybody was only allowed to ask one short, quick, non-stupid question. I made more money on that course than anything I've ever done in that process. But what I'm getting at in the curation element, we very often are going to actually choose to have something that's shorter because the real cost, as you said, is time and money that goes with it. We also get into some other legal issues lately, that if you are curating content for people who are on an hourly wage and they access that not while on that wage, you now have a wage law issue in that sense. So an hourly worker cannot go on your website to access employer-recommended content while off wage. You need to pay them probably time and a half, and if they get a paper cut while doing it, you're going to have a liability problem in that area as well. But what I'm trying to get at, when we think about curation now, and then I'll try to pull this together into what do we do, I want you to think about we're optimizing the learner, we're optimizing the learning producer, we're optimizing the business. So here's what has to happen. And I wish I could share with you, here's the perfect curation technology strategy and the like, boom. It does not exist yet. We are all trying to build this out. So here are the 3 things I think that we need to do, and I hope it's helpful, and if you want to, I certainly invite you to come to our longer, we have a couple of day curation workshop we'll do in January up in Saratoga. Or you can go to the more expensive 1-day version of it in New York. Yeah. Maybe we should do the half-day version. That would be really profitable. But here are the 3 things we need to do. We need to come up with a corporate process, strategy, and taxonomy for curation. A corporate strategy, process, and taxonomy. In other words, how are we going to tag and label? How are we going to, who's going to do that? Who's going to put that? Who's going to make sure it's in compliance? And we can keep going on and on. I would argue that it's probably going to take you a couple of weeks if you wanted to build out a corporate curation strategy to engage all the stakeholders in it, but it would be a wonderful thing for you to actually do. And it's not an off-the-shelf thing, and you don't need a consultant per se to do it, but it's a lot of thinking through internally your needs. And once again, the needs of the learner, the needs of the learning producer, and the needs of the business. Second, you're going to need to figure out what mixture of systems will be used for all the dimensions of curation. Now, I wish I could tell you that the LMS is perfect, but most LMSs are not content-oriented. So in some cases, it may be the LCMS. But in some cases, that's only good for content that's really structured in a traditional learning program. Some of you, it may be a mixture of that and your document management system. For some of you, you may have other systems, like an XAPI system or a learning record system. For some of you, it will be in a shared environment. So even though it's one of the most abandoned pieces of the software on the planet, SharePoint is actually ideally one to be used for curation. The problem is you can't pick the blue button on SharePoint that turns it into a curation-ready environment. So it kind of looks like Mars or Pluto when you look at it. Now with the right coding and the right add-ons, I love what SharePoint is, but we haven't yet figured out the branding and user front end for that. There are, in fact, starting to be now technology platforms that are curation platforms. But I warn you, don't think because you buy a collection from somebody, I don't care who that is, folks I like and deal well with, LinkedIn, Coursera, Filtered, others. That's just a collection. It's not an aggregated technology for all that you curate. It probably will not house those PowerPoints. It will probably not house your internal videos. So in all likelihood, you're not going to come up with a single system. You're going to come up with what we call an ecosystem of where things is curated. I'm hoping as we move to like a learning blockchain model that we'll get to where it doesn't matter which system it is, it's searchable by our learners, it's searchable by our producers, it's searchable by our business. The third level, which I think is a really interesting level, is that we need to come up with a recommendation engine or model by which multiple sources are recommending. And those sources are ratings of other folks, data from how it's been used. In some cases, it's external sources, meaning I actually want to go and look at an external rater around that. So you may decide, I know one group, they use Amazon reviews for some of their ratings. You may want to go to your own association in your field. So you may be an accounting company. You may find that I don't know if it exists, but the National Association of Accounting Firms has their own recommendation system. I would argue that within 2 to 3 years, you will buy and probably inject a recommendation engine. Keep your eyes honed very closely at work that's occurring not yet commercially from Amazon, from Google, from IBM, and even from Facebook at work in those areas. If you are international, keep your eye on Baidu and Alibaba in terms of what they're doing in China. Because what we think is going to happen is we're going to end up with an injection of a recommendation engine that includes external recommendations and internal recommendations. And finally, in that engine, when we get to ultimate curation, it's going to map back to you, the learner. For instance, is English your learning language? It may well be that English is your transactional language. So if you work for Boston Consulting, or you work for Accenture, or you work for Google, English is the transaction language. But is English your learning language? I speak a little bit of German, a middle amount of Spanish, and some Hebrew. In all of those three languages, if I am learning in a language that's not my learning language, it's going to be more difficult. So give me a German piece, but I will want to go back and redo and rethink if I could get it in English. You're going to need to think about language. You're going to need to think about style. You may eventually go to Dan Pink's thing to say, Curation Engine doesn't let you have it during your slump period, you know, or some other element along that way. So what I've tried to do very, very briefly in 40 minutes and 35 seconds here, I've tried to give you the big overview of where curation is, but let me then steal another minute or two to summarize it. It's good news because it's on everybody's plate right now. And in fact, if we don't get better at curation, it doesn't mean that we're not going to make choices. We're just not going to optimize those choices. And so our challenge right now is to work on all three levels. How do we help the learner optimize? How do we help the learning department and the learning producer optimize? And how do we help the business, including the compliance area, optimize? My wish, but it's a fantasy, is that somehow organizations would not all go down separate, different routes on curation. My fantasy is that we would have a curation model that would cut across. And so that's why you heard Richard and I talk about the learning blockchain. Because we actually think if we could get some meat behind the learning blockchain, it would become part of the infrastructure for different curation pieces. We could talk much longer about that. I hope that I've at least piqued your interest. We will put more content out there. I promise not to send you 117 items, okay? If any of you have the budget and the interest, we just are opening, and it'll be live in a couple of days, our Curation Lab. It's in Saratoga Springs in January. I will be teaching it. I will be bringing some of the people you've seen here in by video, Richard Collada, Rob Lauber, and others. And on the first night of the course, we will host you at our 200-year-old Greek revival home, and I have a robotic Toto toilet that you can take a look at. It has nothing to do with the content, but it gets a lot of people to Saratoga. Yeah. So thank you very much. May you enjoy your time in curation, and please, as you get smarter, become my mentor, because I really am intrigued of how we really do collectively optimize for curation. Thank you very much.